Okay, today we're here with Steve Oristaglio, who's a very varied past. He's a businessman and works in asset management and has for many years in London, in New York, currently in Boston, although as you can see, well, I don't know whether you can tell, but he's in the Berkshires at the moment because of our pandemic. And in addition to doing all of that, stags, as we call them, we've known each other since freshman year of college.
1973.
73. Yeah, you gave it away.
I did. That's too long ago.
Lee says we're just gonna say everything was 20 years ago. That was, it's just that we're not gonna
exactly.
It's 20 years ago. Anyway, in all that time, he's also devoted himself to music, and he learned to play the piano. And has built an incredibly powerful and varied band called Full Circle Band that has been performing for the last 7 or 8 years.
Yeah,
7 or 8 years. Primarily in Boston, but you've made trips to other places. And this, we're going to have videos of the Full Circle Band, so you'll get to see Stags and the band in action. They're all students from the Berklee College of Music, which Stag supports. As a matter of fact, it's one of the philanthropic supporters of that school. So he's been deeply immersed in British and American popular music for all these years, and I thought, who better than to talk about Britpop than Steve Oristaglio?
Thank you, Phil. Since around 1973, when I met Phil, we've been debating things since. And the one thing you need to have with Phil when you debate him is a head start. So I asked him kindly if I can kind of give my intro, which will be the only formal part of this. But I wanted to kind of introduce how I think about rock and roll, pop, British pop, and the debate that we've had over the years, which is to compare rock and pop lyrics to poetry. And to do that, such a tall order that I wanted to lead with the very best lyrics that I know, something that can really go head to head with the best poetry. You ready? And I'm not going to sing it because I want to focus on the words. Well, shake it up, baby, now. Shake it up, baby. Twist and shout. Twist and shout. Come on, come on, come on, baby, now. Come on, baby. Come on and work it on out. Work it on out. You know you twist so fine. Twist so fine. You got me going now. Got me going. Let me know that you're mine. Ah, wow. So that was the Beatles live on the Ed Sullivan Show, 1964, and together with the Rolling Stones, both British pop rock bands, ushered in what they're calling the modern age of rock and roll as a mainstream art form. So obviously, I'm talking tongue in cheek to put the best, because obviously those are fairly straightforward lyrics, but it illustrates my first point that I wanted to make. And this is a big deal because we've been debating this for 45 years or whatever. And for me, asking to compare rock lyrics to poetry is like asking who's better at their craft, Allen Ginsberg or Michael Jordan. And Mike, you could also say, well, let's just understand what Michael was saying while he was on the court, the words. And to me, I don't know what to do with that, because on their own, as Twist and Shout demonstrates, rock lyrics generally don't hold their own as words. But I wanted to dig deeper. It was the early 60s. Let's face it, the 50s were a bit stiff. Camille Paglia, another person that Phil and I have debated about for years, she described the 60s using the gods as metaphors, as a Dionysian revolution against the Apollo dominance of 50s society. Dionysus, the god of wine, drunkenness, fertility, festivity, theater. Apollo, the god of knowledge, order, harmony, and reason. And she said, when looked at in this light, rock and roll was the rebellion and the liberation from the constraints of an overly mechanistic culture. And that's what Twist and Shout symbolizes. And where did rock come from? It's anchored actually in American blues, far away from white elitist origins. The songs of struggle, hardship, aspiration, eros, the Mississippi Delta blues, Chicago electric blues, Appalachian folk, black spirituals, free-form jazz, and this is my favorite one when I was reading it, an attitude. It was the adopted music of the Beat generation, On the Road, Woodstock. It also traces its roots, loosely, to English Romanticism, where creativity, rebellion, and imagination ruled as a reaction against the dominance of reason. Rebel, rebel. Shelley, Blake, David Bowie. The emotional intuition superseding rationality, or in Freudian terms, the id holding sway over the superego. So for me, the words are part of it, but it's the whole experience of the music. What is it doing? And that's what I wanted to introduce.
That is so cool. You know, we've studied Shelley and Blake, and I completely agree that that's the connection that you make there, which is a great connection. And the twist and shout thing, of course, you know, I think when I was a younger, more rule-bound person, I wouldn't have been able to hear the overtones of command and incredible oral power, that even, because when you say the words, of course, everybody knows the lyrics, everybody knows the music, and so we're hearing it, you're saying it, but we're also hearing, you know, the song, and that's an incredibly eerie experience, you know, when you say something, but your mind is hearing what you've heard over and over and over again. And to think of that song, it's like an oracular thing. It's coming from, when you talk about Dionysus, it's coming from this place. It's telling people what to do and how to break free from the other commands in their lives, you know, which is to stay still and don't twist and don't shout.
That's right. And that's what the 60s were about. And in some forms, it was unruly and it needed to evolve. And ironically, it took the 60s middle-class English musicians, Eric Clapton, Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin, Rolling Stones, The Who, to bring it to mainstream culture. And it was the African-American blues artists of the United States that they invited over because they saw that spontaneity, they saw the energy, and they were able to even give it more, you know, oomph, energy, creativity, and bravado.
Beatles versus Rolling Stones.
Well, that's a tough one. I was always a Beatles fan. I think that the variety of their music, they just were able to go into so many different dimensions of the ballad, and they had the rock and roll. You know, they had some great rock songs, Helter Skelter, but on balance, and to your students, Phil and I were not part of this group. The really cool kids, liked the Rolling Stones better. They just had that bravado, and they had a more tie to the bluesy spontaneity and the earth and the earthy lyrics, and, you know, the sexual persona. Everything about the Rolling Stones just kind of eked out into kind of the counterculture, more so than the Beatles. I happened to like the Beatles better.
Well, I mean, we Twist and Shout once again is notable also because it comes from the same band that wrote Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, and other incredible, Miss Eleanor Rigby, songs which really are lyric poems, even to, with even however they're presented either orally or on the page. So they had the whole range.
Well, you should know they didn't write it. It was a cover song. It was actually written in the 60s. I forget, wrote it down, but it was first covered by the Isley Brothers, an African-American kind of soul band, and the Beatles brought it mainstream. They didn't write it. They did about
Shout, you mean?
Twist and Shout.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I thought you were saying Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. I was like,
wait. Oh, no. Lucy in the Sky was it was partially written by acid.
Right, LSD, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds.
There you go.
They have a lot of other songs that share that kind of driving simplicity. I want to hold your hand.
Yeah.
So they clearly were.
But then it evolved, and you're right. They became very lyrical. Across the Universe by John Lennon, Eleanor Rigby, Blackbird, which was I don't know if people know this. I think I told you this when we were talking last time. Blackbird, Paul McCartney describes it as the English colloquial term for a woman was bird. I don't know if that would go down well today, but back then it worked. And it was his, to describe it as Blackbird, it was his reaching out in terms of the 60s civil rights movement. And Blackbird singing in the dead of the night, take these broken wings and learn to fly all your life. You were only waiting for this moment to arrive. Beautiful, beautifully done.
It really is. I didn't know that. And of course, yeah, they were highly metaphorical, and there's all sorts of wonderful kind of mysterious things. John is dead if you play the
backwards.
And so they did create a cult of mystery and poeticism, which does, I think, very much go back to the tradition of Blake and Shelley and Keats. What about today? What do you see as the direction of rock and roll?
Well, it's changed quite a bit. You don't have many. There are a few real kind of brazen rock and roll bands, but it has evolved. It's much more pop, soul, and rap. I got a very late start with rap. I kind of resisted it, and I was a bit offended by the lyrics that were even more in your face. But as time has gone by, whether it's Eminem, Jay-Z, Kanye West, all these other groups, there's a whole host of them. I really do appreciate them. And what you have to do as well is the great thing about being associated with two things: basketball, playing mostly pickup since college, but it's a world society. The people that come, we've got Asians, we've got African Americans, we've got Europeans. When we play, there's just a hodgepodge of different people, and they're all playing different types of music. And then the Berkeley community, who I've been playing music with for almost a decade now. 50% of the Berkeley College of Music student body is not from America; they're from overseas. And just in the band that I've put together, we have someone from Singapore, Indonesia, France, England, Canada, all over, and they all bring their music. And I got reintroduced to rap through them and through some of my basketball friends, and I came to see it in a different light. It's doing the same thing that got me excited. The second main point that I wanted to bring to you is that what is rock doing for me? And when poetry hits me, and I've gotten it all from you, Phil, what is it that I'm after? There's such a wide dimension and variety of experiences, and I was noticing for them, listening to them performing rap or listening to rap got me to want to dive in further, because it was doing the same thing that it did for me. It's about the moment. It's not about we can talk about this because I want you to kind of get into, you know, poetry's trying to capture, literature's trying to capture not just the moment, but the connection to human nature and universal themes. And that might be in music as well, but someone else can write that. I'm interested in that moment where time stops. It stops on a basketball court for me. It stops when I'm listening to a great song. And the lyrics come with it, but it's the music and the lyrics and the moment and the community, particularly live performance. And I would encourage your students to from that perspective, to put up and watch U2's live at Slane Castle, where they do Where the Streets Have No Name. Now, Slane Castle is right outside of Dublin. It's the Irish boys who are now world famous, coming home to their hometown to play a live concert. And this is their spiritual song. And it's one of the most beautiful, it's my favorite live rendition of being in the moment. I want to run. I want to hide. I want to tear down the walls that hold me inside. I want to reach out and touch the flame where the streets have no name. That very moment where life stops, you really feel most alive.
You know, and I have a link in the course to that performance, so that students will get to see that, which is great. You know, I'm thinking there's also an interesting paradox in that really comes forward when you say the words, which is this inchoate, imaginative, Dionysian, sexually potent, rule-breaking genre. It has a fairly simple rhymed scheme, and even the music itself oftentimes, you know, is a relatively simple beat, where literary poetry seems to have moved toward a more complex, loose, free verse, as they say, you know. And it's interesting that that's one of the dynamics. I mean, the streets have no name. Boy, those rhymes just really kind of sound out. And that, you know, those words could have been written and would have been understood by an audience in the 19th century.
Yeah, maybe. I think, you know, I'm glad you're saying that. I think what the music does and what U2's been able to do, particularly, there's only 3 of them, but they've been able to create what's called arena rock. The way their guitar riffs and drums and the vocals emanate out, and the machinery, the technology behind it. It actually has that complexity. That's what they've been able to do. And sometimes, you know, you take I Am the Walrus. You know, it's got that, you know, jumping the 100 words over a minute. Sometimes that gets in the way of hearing the music. And I think the Streets Have No Name, to bring it down to some simple themes with the way the music emanates out, particularly at Slane Castle. You should hear it. You want the music to be down to earth, relatively straightforward in your ear, and you want it to evoke some themes that, you know, are universal, and that's what it does. So it doesn't have that jumpiness as I Am the Walrus, but it's just as powerful, if not more.
When you're collaborating with the Full Circle Band, how do you guys decide what songs that you want to? What's that process like? I mean, are you trying to do songs which you think the audience has heard, or are you doing them songs that you don't think they may not have heard, and you want to do them differently? How do you arrange that?
Well, in the early days, I decided, and you know, and I think it was good. But I kind of ruled with an iron. I had these songs, covers that I wanted to get out to. I knew my audience and blah, blah, blah. And then the person who was there's usually one person in the band who's, you know, the organizer, the director, the whatever you want to call it, takes the lead in arranging all that stuff. And it changed over to a person named Dave McKay, who's the keyboard player, brilliant musician, very respected musician among the crowd, but also a great organizer, a great the producer. And he did something very clever, something I can't do. I would be in your face saying, no, you got to do it this way. He never did that. He let me say, this is what I want. And then he would scratch his head and goes, that's a really good idea. I like that. You might want to consider, and slowly but surely, I would look at the songs that we ended up doing 2 months later, and it retained about half of the ones that I picked. Knowing that if he went straight up against me, I'd get into my classic debates, and he was just going to fashion it in a marathon approach.
Right.
And that's how it was, a combination of the band whispering in his ear, we don't want to do those three. Let's move it over to these. We don't mind keeping these. And we ended up collaborating in that kind of fun way.
And certainly as the band evolved, it got a lot bigger. The venues got bigger. The music got more, at one point you had backup singers, the three girls there. And I'm curious, as you review, because you guys aren't playing anymore, but as you review that progression, what do you see in terms of your musical taste changing or developing?
Well, I can't say that it's changed much, other than they keep me fresh with new material. And there is. It just happens not to be in classic rock and roll, but pop, rap, soul is alive and well. I think there's great stuff coming out. It made, when I listen, we have a number of friends that that love music, including my brother Paul, who you're friends with as well, Dean Lindemuth. What I notice is they have taken the position that they like what the music from the past, and they're sticking with it, and I do too. I love it, but I've been introduced to this whole new set of material that I find as fresh as any, and I think it keeps me young and open-minded. And what has happened is they definitely pick songs that they're less concerned about the words. So I'm fighting because I want something that has meaning to me lyrically as well. And they want to play songs that each of the instruments have some technical proficiency that is able to kind of showcase the band, and that's where we ended up with Promised Land. Promised Land of Bruce Springsteen. I mean, I have 10 favorite Bruce Springsteen songs. That just happens to be one of them. But we intersected because it's got this beautiful theme that I love, my favorite. But the song itself showcases all these instruments in a beautiful musical collage. And I think you've posted that one as well. And the words, I won't, Promised Land, obviously biblical, and he refers to it in Thunder Road, where, again, the way I think about it is, we can sit around hoping that the afterlife is going to be something that we're going to love, or we can focus on today. And Thunder Road gets into that theme. You can hide beneath your covers, study your pain, make crosses from your lovers, throw roses in the rain, waste your summers praying in vain for a savior to rise from these streets. And he goes on, and wants to basically trade in these wings for some wheels. Mm-hmm. Wheels being a metaphor for today's action out on the road. And Promised Land, and it has all the grit and all the struggle. And he writes the last verse, there's a dark cloud rising from the desert floor. I packed my bags, I'm heading straight into the storm. Gonna be a twister to blow everything down. That ain't got the faith to stand its ground. Blow away the dreams that tear you apart. Blow away the dreams that break your heart. Blow away the lives that leave you nothing but lost and brokenhearted. The dogs on Main Street howl because they understand. if I can take this moment into my hands. Mister, I ain't a boy. No, I'm a man. And I believe in a promised land. So that song, which grabs me lyrically, also has the music for them that allowed each of them to do these solos and then come together. And they adopted it. And that's what I've learned. They've adopted my music. I've had to adopt their music.
You know, this is one thing that I hadn't thought about until you really are showing us. And one of the things the students are going to be doing this term is they have to learn by heart 60 lines of poetry, and it has to be somewhere from the course text. And I hadn't thought about the fact that we could use the promised land. I mean, you know, to hear those words spoken with such conviction and power, and again having the echo in my head of the music, it's a wonderful experience. And of course, we both admired Springsteen's, well, as a musician, obviously, but we both admired his memoir.
Yeah.
Which, you know, I mean, demonstrates that he is just a wonderful writer, and he brings that skill to his narrative lyrics, you know, which are usually so complex that people don't even get it. I mean, my favorite story about that is when Ronald Reagan praised
Born in the USA.
Clearly not having listened to the lyrics, you know, Born in a Dead Man's Town.
It was a protest song.
Yes, but he didn't quite catch on. And
No.
the genius of the song is that you can appeal to Ronald Reagan because it seems upbeat. The music gives a dimension that the words then kind of subvert, and you know, that's great.
Well, that's the danger in rock lyrics, because the music's grabbing you. I mean, Gerald and I often make fun of, we're listening to this song that gives us this wonderful feeling, and we haven't paid attention to the words. We listen to the words, and it's not supposed to do that. And that's why sometimes I think the artist has to intentionally make sure they've got the right motive, or the right lyric to, if the music came into their head first. You wanted to say something else, because I have a couple excerpts from poems that I want to read too, that bring them together, but I want you to go next.
Well, as you said that, you know, I was thinking of something Socrates said. He said that when music changes, when the people's music changes, the culture and politics follow. And I think, you know, he's talking about 6th century
Interesting.
Athens. Isn't that really what's happening here? I mean, you have a bunch of people who were outside the mainstream and who somehow took the stage and moved the culture and the politics.
That's true, and I think a lot of rock and roll in particular has been trying to be a spokesperson for movements. At the same time, and I'm into that, and I love that. At the same time, for me, it's just as much about community, and that's why I love live. Like, it doesn't have to be live. It could be, and you've been at many of these. We're down the seashore, friends have gotten together. You know, we've been to the beach, we had a nice dinner. What do? We gather and we sing. We put it on the CD, or we put it on our iTunes, but we come together as a community. At a live show, it's the same. Now, if it's also mixed with themes of all different sorts that rock and roll has come to stand for, that's even better. There's so much variety in poetry and literature. It's the same in music, and we're only talking about one little genre within that. I wanted to know how much time we have, but we go way back, and you introducing me to some of the shorter poems. As you know, my attention span kind of wanes sometimes, but I want to go back to, I want to touch the flame, right? I want to reach out and touch the flame. Well, that reminds me of the excerpt from Yeats's My 50th Year. What is it, from Vacillation?
Yes.
And it's almost a direct reference. My 50th year had come and gone. I sat a solitary man in a crowded London shop. an open book, an empty cup, on the marble tabletop. While on the shop and street I gazed, my body of a sudden blazed. It's that moment. In 20 minutes, more or less, it seemed so great, my happiness, that I was blessed and could bless. That's what poetry is meant to me. Those aspects of it. Another one from Allen Ginsberg, Sunflower Sutra. He spends half the poem, or more than half of the poem, talking about all the things that have happened to this poor sunflower. You know, civilization, pollution, everything. And it goes, all these entangled in your mummied roots, and you there standing before me in the sunset, all your glory in your form, a perfect beauty of a sunflower, a perfect, excellent, lovely sunflower existence, a sweet, natural eye to the new hip moon, woke up alive and excited. And, that's my theme for pop and rock. There's so many different dimensions, but that's what I'm after. I want to have that moment to wake up excited and alive. So,
Steve Oristaglio, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Phil.
And they actually will remember that poem, the Yeats poem, because I embedded the essay that I wrote about that poem, about your daughter, Sienna, who you taught that poem to when she was 5 years old, and she recited it. And so the students will see that in an essay called Teaching Tu Fu on the Night Shift. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
To Gerald and Sienna and Jet and Jason when you see him. And we'll talk soon.
Good. Thanks, Phil.